Cultural contamination. It wasn't supposed to be this way. Our mission was simple: observe, document, and leave without a trace. We didn't even come here for the locals, really. Our interest was the flora and fauna. But as soon as we stepped onto this Edenic planet, the locals, with their painted faces and strange songs, found us. They always find you, no matter how well you think you've hidden. At first, it was all harmless curiosity. They welcomed us into their woven huts and showed us their impossibly intricate gardens. It was like nothing we'd ever seen before. Everything, from the tall violet-stemmed trees to the sparkling rivers that flowed like liquid sapphire, seemed almost sculpted for aesthetic perfection. Their society matched the landscape. No signs of crime, poverty, or conflict. A utopia, we thought. And then we arrived. Unassuming explorers, so polite and careful. At least, that's what we told ourselves. But if you think you can merely observe a culture without changing it, you're fooling yourself. We were walking sparks, and their society was bone-dry kindling. I remember the first time I realized we were having an effect. It was a minor incident, the kind that would have barely registered back on Earth. One of the locals, Jatheko, he called himself, seemed to take a particular liking to the little trinkets we had. Nothing special, just some spare tools and old gear we kept in our packs. I lent him a knife one day. He said it would be useful for harvesting some peculiar fruit. He didn't give it back. It didn't bother me much. Honestly, I figured it was more useful to him than me. But later, when I saw that knife glinting at his side, something was different in his expression. It wasn't the same serene contentment I'd seen in his people before. There was a glint in his eyes, a spark of possession. Days passed, and Jatheko wasn't the only one sporting something he hadn't made himself. A handful of others began to accumulate our cast-offs. Some had our tools, others wore scraps of our clothing tied around their waists. It was all innocent at first, a sort of friendly exchange. Then someone must have asked where these things came from and why some had them and others didn't. And that's when the questions began. At first, they were about us. Why do you share things unequally? Why does this one hold the shiny stone and that one doesn't? We tried to explain the concept of ownership and trade, but the more we talked, the more their serene brows furrowed. I saw the discomfort spreading like ripples in a pond. It escalated when I noticed that Jatheko wasn't just using the knife. He was brandishing it, parading it around like a symbol. I asked him about it one evening as we watched the twin suns set. He seemed to hesitate before answering, as if trying to find words for a feeling he hadn't known until recently. "It's mine," he said slowly, tasting the unfamiliar term. The next day, we found the first body. It was just outside the village, an elder whose name I never learned. His eyes were open, but lifeless, a deep gash cutting across his chest where Jatheko's knife had found him. It was the first time anyone in their society had seen such violence, or so we were told. There had been no concept of murder, no word for it, until now. I'd like to say that we tried to contain it, but how do you unteach a concept? You can't stuff knowledge back into the bottle once it's spilled out. The elders gathered and begged us to take back our artifacts, our ideas, our poisonous words. But it was too late. The young ones had already begun to form factions. There was Jatheko's group, proud and eager to claim more things from us, and then there were others. Those who resisted what we represented, who still clung to their old ways and despised the changes. We tried to leave. We thought that if we removed ourselves, the sickness would burn itself out, that maybe the elders could heal the wounds we'd inflicted. But we didn't know how deep it had already spread. The last time we saw the village, it was smouldering in ruins, the air thick with the acrid stench of burned thatch and dried blood. We never learned what sparked the final collapse, whether it was a quarrel over a knife or some other scrap we'd left behind. Maybe it didn't matter. You can't unsee your first murder. You can't unknow greed. Our captain ordered us to stay in orbit, to observe from a distance. He was reluctant to intervene directly. "We're not gods," he said. "It's not our place to fix what's broken. Besides, it was never a perfect world to begin with." That's what he kept telling himself, even as we watched their society fracture in real time. The satellite feeds showed villages rising up against each other, resources claimed and hoarded, the first signs of primitive hierarchy taking shape. The utopia that had once existed was now no more than a memory fading into dust and ash. It was surreal, knowing we had done this, brought ruin to an entire world without even trying. I'd sit in my quarters, watching the feeds play out like some twisted drama, and I'd wonder what right we had to be here in the first place. The captain's orders were clear: observe but do not interfere. But I wasn't the only one having doubts. A few of us, the younger ones mostly, started whispering about setting things right. We could drop supplies, teach them governance, perhaps even stay and guide them. After all, weren't we responsible for this? But I couldn't shake the feeling that anything we did would only make things worse. How do you tell a people you've never fully understood that the answers lie not in our hands, but theirs? How do you admit that you broke something you never really knew how to fix? Weeks passed, and the chaos below only deepened. Entire clans rose and fell in the span of days, and violence became as common as their once peaceful songs. We argued endlessly on the bridge. Those in favor of intervention claimed it was our duty as the catalyst for this nightmare. Those against it pointed to history, to all the other worlds where our meddling had done more harm than good. In the end, the captain decided we'd done enough damage. We turned away, our engines flaring as we slipped into the void once more. The planet disappeared from the viewport, swallowed by the dark. We left them to it, our gift, our curse. And in the silence of the stars, I thought about Jathico. Was he still alive? Was he still clutching that knife, the first artifact of their new world? Or had it been pried from his hands, another victim of the chaos we had ignited? Perhaps they will find a way to rebuild, to make something new out of the ashes. Or maybe they will destroy themselves utterly, the fires of our cultural contamination burning their way to the very roots of their world. We weren't gods, no. We were just explorers. But sometimes that's all it takes to ruin paradise.